Golden afternoon sunlight spilled through the lace curtains of Whispering Pines Bakery, casting warm stripes across the old wooden floor. Madeline Cooper, seated quietly in her wheelchair near a modest vanilla cake, stared at the 27 flickering candles without moving a muscle. It was her birthday, and like so many before it, she was completely alone. The little bell above the door jingled softly. A man in his mid-30s stepped in, holding the hand of his bubbly 7-year-old daughter. The girl clutched a small, brightly wrapped box and was chatting excitedly in a way only children do, her laughter echoing through the cozy shop. Spotting the woman by herself, the girl tugged at her father's shirt and whispered urgently. The man, pausing for a moment, gave his daughter a nod, then turned toward Madeline with gentle intent. "Mind if we join you?" he asked, voice quiet and kind. Madeline had long ago learned to measure love in the silence between her father's phone calls. Now 27, she had lived the last 5 years paralyzed from the waist down after a highway collision that fractured far more than just her spine. The life she inhabited was one of wealth, luxury, and careful design, what most would call comfort. But to her, it often felt like a velvet-lined prison. Her father, Edward Cooper, a powerful executive of a cybersecurity empire, could shift global markets with a word. But somehow, he could not find 5 minutes to be with his only daughter. The accident had rearranged her world like a puzzle dropped from a great height. Not just her body, which remained frozen beneath her waist, but the bond with the man who once tucked her in at night and whispered promises. Instead of presents, he gave her provisions. The best home care nurses, a fully customized estate with state-of-the-art accessibility, and doctors with degrees longer than their names. Each of them said the same thing: she would never walk again. What he could not provide, however, was himself. Madeline had grown used to birthdays spent with staff paid to pretend they cared, to texts sent with emojis instead of phone calls, and to holidays full of catered meals and uncomfortable small talk with strangers hired to keep her company. Her wheelchair had become more than a necessity, it was a barrier between her and the world she once danced through. Caleb Donovan, age 35, carried his grief like a backpack, heavy but manageable. A carpenter by trade, Caleb had been raising his daughter, Ellie, alone ever since his wife Rachel died during childbirth. Where Edward fled from his pain, Caleb embraced his. He carved it into every table leg, every rocking chair, every swing he built with his calloused hands. His workshop smelled of sawdust and healing. Ellie had Rachel's sparkling eyes and Caleb's quiet kindness, a mix that made her especially attuned to people who seemed alone. Maybe it came from growing up with a mother she'd only met in bedtime stories. She understood something rare for a child, that love did not always need a body to be felt, and that a family could still be whole even with missing pieces. Caleb had taught her to watch for the quiet ones. The ones who smiled with their lips but not their eyes. Everyone needs a friend, sweetheart, he'd tell her. Sometimes, it takes a little bravery to go first. So when Ellie saw Madeline sitting by herself with an untouched birthday cake, her young heart recognized something it had seen before, in her father's eyes on his toughest days. Without waiting, she grabbed the tiny cupcake she had decorated that morning, one topped with a wobbly silver star candle. "I'm Ellie," she said, standing boldly by Madeline's side. "This is for you. Daddy and I made it this morning." Madeline blinked, unsure how to respond. When was the last time someone approached her just to be kind? Not to serve her. Not to be paid. Just to share something small and sweet. Ellie continued without hesitation, her voice as sincere as it was unfiltered. "We come here every year on my mommy's birthday. She's in heaven now. But Daddy says she still celebrates with us." Her words were so open, so raw, so pure, they pierced through the polite wall Madeline had learned to build. Caleb stepped forward with a shy smile and gently pulled out a chair. "I'm Caleb," he said, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who had seen dark days and survived them. "That's a beautiful cake. No one should celebrate alone." Madeline felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Ellie climbed onto the chair beside her and, without waiting for permission, began to sing a slightly off-key but heartbreakingly sweet version of "Happy Birthday." Madeline closed her eyes, And for the first time in years, she made a wish. A simple one. One that almost hurt to hope for. She wished not to be alone anymore. Caleb's deep voice joined his daughter's, their duet filling the small bakery with a warmth Madeline hadn't felt in years. A few other customers glanced over and smiled, but Madeline hardly noticed. Her world, for that moment, had shrunk to this tiny table. To two strangers who somehow made her feel seen. Over the following weeks, what began as a brief encounter blossomed into something deeper. They started meeting at Cedar Hill Park. Ellie would toss breadcrumbs to the ducks while chatting endlessly about her latest drawings, her favorite stories, and the imaginary picture she held of her mother. Caleb never once brought attention to Madeline's chair. He didn't flinch when she rolled over uneven grass or had to pause to reposition her cushion. To him, it was simply part of her, like the color of her eyes or the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous. Their conversations began light: books, movies, Ellie's latest escapades. But slowly, the layers peeled back. Caleb spoke of Rachel not with raw pain, but with the reverence of someone who had turned grief into memory. He told stories of how Rachel taught preschool and believed every child was a galaxy of promise. How she painted murals of enchanted forests in their cramped apartment, dreaming of fairylands and happy endings. How she faced the pregnancy complications with a courage that still left him breathless. Madeline found herself telling Caleb things she had never confessed to anyone, not even the expensive therapists her father had hired. At first, she spoke about the accident clinically. A drunk driver. A red light. The sense of flying through the air. The eerie calm before the pain hit. But soon, her voice trembled as she revealed deeper wounds. Waking up in a hospital bed with her father speaking to doctors like he was negotiating contracts, not fighting for his daughter. She opened up because Caleb listened not to respond, but to understand. The realization crept in slowly, like water through a cracked foundation. Madeline was no longer seen as a daughter to be cherished, but as a problem to be managed. Day after day in her father's vast estate, every convenience had been provided for, except the one that truly mattered, the need to be seen as a whole person, not just a woman in a wheelchair. Yet Ellie had a way of cutting through that heaviness like sunlight through clouds. She would often interrupt Madeline's quiet grief at just the right moment, pulling her into a world of crayons and paper dragons, where wheelchairs could fly and sadness was just another shade in the crayon box. To Ellie, Madeline wasn't broken. She was a vital part of her make-believe kingdom. Almost daily, she would ask with endearing seriousness, "Are you happy today, Miss Maddie?" One afternoon, while Ellie was busy coloring at a nearby cafe table, Caleb glanced up just in time to see Madeline laugh at something Ellie had said. The sound hit him deep in the chest, not like a lightning bolt of romantic awakening, but more like the first soft bud of spring breaking through winter soil. Madeline must have felt his gaze, because she turned her head. For a few seconds, their eyes locked. The buzz of the cafe faded away. It was just them. Two people, both quietly broken in their own ways, realizing maybe they didn't have to heal alone. Not despite their scars, but perhaps because of them. Caleb reached across the table and lightly touched her hand. "Madeline, Ellie and I," he paused, choosing his words. "We're not here because we feel sorry for you. We're here because you make our days better. You make us better." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes, and this time, she didn't look away. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I," Caleb admitted, his voice steady. "But maybe we can figure it out together." And so they did, bit by bit, like a delicate garden tended by people who knew the value of patience. They found joy in the smallest things, Ellie teaching Madeline how to fold paper cranes, Caleb adjusting chairs in restaurants without being asked, and Madeline reading stories aloud using a different voice for each character while Caleb watched with quiet warmth. Their little unit, stitched together by love and pain, might have grown into something whole, if not for the watchful eye of Edward Cooper peering down from his polished skyscraper of a life. The moment his house staff reported that Madeline had been keeping company with someone he hadn't personally approved of, Edward responded like a general in wartime. He hired private investigators, expecting dirt. What he got was something that, in his mind, was far worse. Caleb Donovan, widowed carpenter. Modest income. Father to a little girl. Harmless to some, perhaps. But to Edward, this man was a parasite, feeding on the vulnerability of his daughter. One evening, Edward summoned Madeline to his study, a room she rarely entered. The walls were lined with monitors showing market tickers, the air heavy with the scent of leather and disappointment. "You're going to cut off contact with that man immediately," he said flatly, eyes never leaving his laptop. "He's using you, Maddie. What else would a man like that want with someone like you?" The words landed like fists. Not because they were loud, but because they were so casually cruel. "Someone like me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You mean your broken daughter? The one you can't look at because I remind you you're not invincible?" Edward finally looked up, his face a hard mask she remembered from boardrooms he used to drag her to as a child. "I'm protecting you. You're naive. You've been sheltered your whole life. You don't understand how the world works." Madeline let out a bitter laugh, the sound unfamiliar even to her. "Sheltered? I've been imprisoned. There's a difference. I'm doing what's best for you." "No," she said, her voice steadying. "Caleb and Ellie see me. Really see me. When was the last time you looked at me and didn't see a burden?" Edward rose, his height meant to intimidate. It had worked in boardrooms for decades. But it only made Madeline feel smaller in her chair. "That's enough. If you keep seeing him, I'll take legal action. I'll claim he's exploiting a disabled woman. I'll bury his little woodworking shop. You think I won't?" The threat was real. Her father had crushed competitors for far less. And the thought of Caleb and Ellie being destroyed by Edward's cold efficiency made her stomach turn. That night, she sat in the dark, shaking as she typed the message. "I can't see you anymore. Please don't contact me. I'm sorry." The words felt like glass in her throat. Each letter a betrayal of the only real connection she had built in years. Caleb read the message again and again, as though the meaning might change if he stared long enough. But it didn't. It was cold. Final. And it wasn't her voice. Later that night, Ellie found him sitting in the dark, phone still in his hand. "Why are you sad, Daddy?" she asked, crawling into his lap, small arms wrapping around him. "Miss Maddie can't see us anymore, sweet pea," he said, voice rough from unspoken grief. Ellie sat quietly for a moment, processing the truth the way only a child can. "But she loves us," she said simply. "I know she does." Her smile was different when we were with her. A real one. Not the kind people fake. Caleb held his daughter close, his heart breaking not just for himself, but for Ellie too. Because even she was learning that sometimes, love wasn't enough. He respected Madeline's message for 3 days. 3 long, aching days that felt like holding his breath underwater. His workshop echoed with silence. The joy of creating had turned to dust. Ellie no longer sang around the house. The color had drained from her world. On the 4th day, when Ellie asked him quietly if Miss Maddie didn't want them anymore because they weren't rich, something inside Caleb snapped. Not in anger, but in resolve. He would not let his daughter believe that love had a price tag. They drove to the Cooper estate, crossing into a world of iron gates and sterile perfection. The security guard was polite, but firm. "I'm sorry, sir. You're not on the approved guest list." Behind him, the mansion rose like a gilded fortress. Ellie pressed her face to the bars of the gate. "Miss Maddie," she called softly. "We miss you. Please come back." Her little voice was carried by the wind. It couldn't be bought, sold, or silenced. Inside the estate, Madeline heard that precious sound from her room, where she had locked herself away since her father's ultimatum. It broke her. She wheeled herself to the window and saw them standing by the gate, Caleb, hand on Ellie's shoulder. Both looking so small, so heartbreakingly out of place. So heartbreakingly right. Something inside Madeline shifted, not shattered, but reset, like a bone slipping back into place after being out of alignment for far too long. All those years she had bowed her head, traded her own voice for the false comfort of her father's control, now lined up in her mind like dominoes. She had always chosen his expectations over her own happiness. But suddenly, she understood, shielding Caleb and Ellie from Edward's threats meant nothing if it cost them what they had built together. Without overthinking, she maneuvered her wheelchair down the back hallways of the estate, choosing the staff elevator rather than the main one. The last thing she wanted was to be intercepted. When the elevator reached the kitchen floor, she rolled straight toward the service entrance. Maria, the family's longtime cook and quiet witness to Madeline's childhood, looked up from her cutting board. The two women shared a look. No explanations were needed. Maria simply walked to the door and held it open, whispering, "Go find your joy, Mija," before letting her slip into the night. The evening air was crisp, and a steady drizzle had begun to fall. But Madeline did not care. She knew where she needed to go. Some inner compass, the same one that had pulled her toward Caleb in the first place, guided her wheels down the quiet sidewalks of town. Rain soaked through her sweater, and the cold bit at her hands as she struggled against the slick pavement. But she did not stop. By the time she reached Whispering Pines Bakery, her arms were aching, her hair clinging to her cheeks. With trembling fingers, she pushed the door open. The familiar jingle of the bell rang out like an answered prayer. The cafe was mostly empty. But at the corner table, their table, Caleb and Ellie sat, looking just as lost as she felt. They had come there after being turned away at the estate gates, drawn by the same quiet force of hope and memory. "Madeline!" Ellie leapt from her chair and ran to her, wrapping small arms around her soaked frame. "You came back. I knew you would. I told Daddy you love us." Caleb stood slowly. His eyes took in her drenched clothes, the raw determination on her face, the quiet desperation in her breath. Without saying a word, he removed his jacket and gently draped it over her shoulders. His hand lingered there for just a moment, feeling her shiver under his touch. "You're freezing," he said, voice soft and steady. "What are you doing here, Maddie?" She met his eyes. Rain and tears mixed on her face, indistinguishable now. "I'm choosing," she said quietly. "For the first time in 4 years, I'm making a choice that's mine. And I choose you. I choose Ellie. I choose us." Her voice cracked. "My father can threaten me all he wants. But I won't live like a prisoner anymore." Caleb sank to one knee beside her chair, leveling his gaze with hers. His own eyes were glassy with emotion. "Are you sure about this? He could make life difficult. He could try to ruin us." She reached out, her cold fingers gently cupping his jaw, feeling the familiar texture of his stubble, the warmth beneath it. "Let him try," she whispered. "I already lost my legs. I'm not losing my heart too. My heart is here, with you and your daughter." Just then, the door slammed open behind them with a gust of wind. Edward Cooper stood in the entrance, completely drenched, fury written across his face. His expensive suit was soaked through, his gray hair disheveled, and his hands clenched at his sides. He had tracked her location through the GPS on her phone. "Maddie, this has gone far enough," he barked. "You're coming home. Now." His voice boomed across the cafe, sharp with authority. But before Madeline could respond, a small figure stepped forward. Ellie, barely half the height of the adults in the room, planted herself in front of Madeline's wheelchair with all the courage her 6-year-old frame could muster. "You're mean," she said clearly, her voice steady. "You're her dad, but you're mean. My dad says being family means being there, not just paying for things. You make Miss Maddie cry. Good dads don't do that." Edward blinked, thrown off balance by the quiet weight of her accusation. "You don't understand," he tried. "I'm protecting my daughter." Ellie shook her head solemnly. "No, you're not. You're just scared. You're protecting yourself from being sad. My dad misses my mommy, but he still stays. He doesn't run." The air in the cafe thickened with the truth of her words. Edward looked from Ellie to Madeline. And for the first time in years, he really saw her. His daughter, soaked to the bone, seated in her wheelchair, guarded by a carpenter and a little girl, looked more alive than he had seen her since the accident. There was fire in her expression, strength in her voice, and love in the way Caleb stood beside her. This was his daughter. Not a broken thing to fix. Not a burden to manage. But a woman, braver than he had ever allowed himself to see. "Maddie," he started, voice cracking. "Dad," she cut in, her tone firm. "When I woke up in that hospital, terrified and paralyzed, Do you know what I needed? Not specialists. Not robotic beds. I needed you. I needed my father to sit beside me and tell me we'd figure it out. Instead, you vanished behind spreadsheets and paid doctors to talk for you. She leaned forward in her chair. I'm not a line item in your company. I'm not a project. I'm your daughter. And I've found someone who sees me as whole, even if I'm not. Edward slumped. His power drained away like water from a broken glass. He staggered toward a nearby chair and sat, looking older than his 63 years. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows like judgment. I didn't know what to do, he said at last, barely audible. When your mother died, I buried myself in work. It felt noble, building something for her memory. But when you were hurt, all that success meant nothing. I couldn't fix it. I didn't know how to stay. Caleb, quiet until now, finally spoke. You're not alone in that, he said. When Rachel died, I wanted to go with her. But Ellie needed me, so I stayed. Scared, grieving, but I stayed. He stepped closer. Your daughter doesn't need your protection, Mr. Cooper. She needs you. Edward looked at him, a working-class man with no title, no portfolio, and saw something he could never buy. Understanding. Presence. I lost 4 years, Edward said, his voice breaking. How do I begin to get them back? Madeline rolled toward him and reached out her hand. One day at a time, she said softly. That's how I learned to live with this chair. We do it together, day by day. Edward grasped her hand, holding it tight. I'm sorry, Madeline. I thought throwing money at the pain would bury it. But I only made it worse. I turned you into a task instead of being your father. Just then Ellie, sensing the weight of the moment had lifted, looked up and asked with wide, hopeful eyes, So, does that mean we can be a family now? Because I really want Miss Maddie to be my mom. The innocence of the question broke the last of the tension, and soft laughter filled the cafe. Edward looked at his daughter, then at Caleb, then at the brave little girl who had spoken truth to power. If you'll have me, he said, voice barely above a whisper, I'd like to try. I'd like to be your dad again. Maybe even a granddad someday. Madeline squeezed his hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. We'd like that too, Dad. We really would. A year had passed, and the old bakery called Sweet Memories had never looked more alive. Ribbons of ivory silk hung from the beams, fresh flowers spilled out of glass jars, and the whole place buzzed with a warmth that was hard to put into words. It was not just Madeline's 23rd birthday, it was her wedding day. She had chosen this place on purpose. This was where her life had truly restarted, where a stranger's kindness cracked open a door she thought was sealed forever. The guest list was short, but every person there mattered. Caleb's buddies from the carpentry shop, men who were like brothers to him. A handful of old friends Madeline had reconnected with after shaking loose her father's grip. The bakery staff, who had witnessed the blooming of their love. And Edward Lancaster, the man who once locked his daughter in a golden cage, now standing proudly, ready to walk her down the aisle. The aisle itself was wide enough for her wheelchair. Ellie had decorated it with flowers and ribbons until it looked like something out of a dream. Madeline wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully tailored to flow around the chair in soft waves. When she looked up and caught Caleb's eyes at the makeshift altar, her whole face lit up like sunlight through stained glass. Edward had changed more in a year than most people do in a lifetime. He had stepped back from his empire, promoted those who had long deserved it, and, for the first time, learned how to lean on others. He had been to every one of Madeline's physical therapy sessions. Not to oversee, not to manage, just to be there, just to learn how to be part of her world without trying to control it. He and Caleb, surprisingly, had become friends. Evenings in Caleb's workshop had turned into something like therapy for Edward. Hands that once gripped billion-dollar contracts now shaped wood, slow and uncertain, but full of intent. He discovered that creating something from nothing was its own kind of prayer. As he walked beside Madeline's chair that afternoon, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, his eyes brimmed with tears he made no effort to hide. "You look radiant, sweetheart," he whispered. "Your mother would be so proud of you." Madeline smiled gently and squeezed his hand. "She'd be proud of you too, Dad." for finding your way back." When they reached Caleb, Ellie stood beaming at his side in a sunflower yellow dress, with matching blooms in her hair, practically vibrating with joy. The bakery's owner, who had witnessed that very first moment they met, was now officiating their wedding. Somehow it felt perfect. Caleb's vows were plain-spoken, steady, and full of meaning. "Madeline," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about finding someone whose broken pieces fit yours just right. I promise to push your chair when you're tired, to carry you when I must, and most of all, to see you, not the chair, not your past, but the incredible woman who saved me and Ellie from a life that had gone dim." Madeline's vows left hardly a dry eye in the room. "Caleb, you and Ellie didn't just accept my limitations, you showed me they didn't limit what I could become. You gave me a family, a tomorrow, a love I only thought existed in stories. I promise to be the mother Ellie deserves, the partner you need, and to choose us, over and over again, for the rest of our lives." When they kissed, Ellie let out a cheer so loud and happy that the room burst into laughter. It was the kind of moment that glued itself into the heart forever. The reception happened right there, in the bakery that had become their sacred ground. Caleb's carpenter crew brought out instruments and played lively bluegrass. Madeline danced the way only she could, spinning her wheelchair with wild abandon while Ellie danced in loops around her. The joy was contagious. Edward surprised everyone when he took the mic, his voice trembling, not with fear, but with honesty. "For most of my life," he began, "I thought success meant never needing anyone, never showing weakness. But my daughter, her husband, and their little girl, they taught me something else. Real strength doesn't come from walls. It comes from letting people in. Caleb, thank you for seeing what I couldn't. Ellie, thank you for the courage only a child can carry. And Madeline, thank you for choosing love even when I failed you." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Your mother always told me I worked too much. She was right. But I'm learning. It's not too late to learn." As the night wore on, Madeline stepped outside to breathe in the quiet. Above her, stars twinkled in the dark like they were in on some kind of secret. Inside, the music kept playing. Laughter spilled through the doorway like light. Caleb joined her, holding a slice of their wedding cake. "No one should eat cake alone," he said, echoing the words he had spoken to her a year ago. Madeline laughed softly and pulled him close for a kiss. "I'll never be alone again, will I?" He shook his head with a smile. "Not a chance. You've got me, Ellie, and maybe someone else too." He gently rested a hand on her belly. Her eyes widened. She had planned to tell him the next morning. "How did you know?" Caleb chuckled. "Ellie told me. Said you've been getting sick in the mornings. She's got eyes like a hawk. She's already planning what to teach the baby." Madeline laughed, her voice tangled with happy tears. "The doctor said it might be complicated because of my condition." Caleb knelt beside her chair. His eyes were calm and sure. "Then we face it. Together. That's what we do, right? We face it together." 6 months later, Madeline gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel Richard Morris. Samuel for Sarah's father. Richard for the grandfather who finally remembered how to love. The hospital room overflowed with love. Edward held his grandson with hands that shook, not from age, but from awe. Ellie leaned close to the baby's face and began explaining all the most important things about being in their family. "You have to know," she told him solemnly, "that we're not just any family. We picked each other. That's the best kind of family." Caleb stood beside Madeline's bed, their fingers locked, his eyes wide with wonder at what they had built. From that lonely birthday cake to this moment of pure joy, it had been a long, often painful road. There were pregnancy scares, moments of fear and doubt. Times when old habits threatened to creep back in. Edward sometimes slipped into his workaholic ways. Caleb faced his old fear of loss when Madeline's health took a dip. But they learned something along the way. Healing is not a finish line. It is a journey. Step by step. We'll turn by we'll turn. They discovered that love is not about being perfect. It is about being present. Especially when it is hard. Madeline looked around the room. Her father, now a soft-spoken grandfather. Ellie, goofing off to make her baby brother giggle. Caleb looking at her like she was everything. And she remembered that wish she made on her 22nd birthday. She just wanted not to be alone. And the universe, in all its messy grace, gave her something far greater. A love that saw every scar. A family built from the ashes of loss and the seeds of hope. A future that proved the best gardens often bloom from the most broken soil. As baby Samuel wrapped his tiny fingers around her pinky, Madeline whispered a silent thank you for the road that brought her home. Outside the hospital window, those same stars that once watched over her loneliness now bore witness to a family that had chosen each other again and would keep choosing one another, with every birthday still to come. Have thoughts? Come. One more? Subscribe. Simple. Human. That's what we do here.